Welcome to Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. What if you could learn from experienced real estate investors, find out what got them to where they are now, get insight into their daily habits, and take these insights to inspire your own growth? Each week, Jonathan Green shares an in-depth look at the mindful approach to real estate investing. Jonathan is a lifelong real estate investor, advisor, and coach, as well as the founder and team leader of Streamlined Properties. Whether you're looking to start from scratch, get to the next level, or just for a straightforward and honest approach to real estate investing, Jonathan seeks to provide a free mentorship program you can take with you anywhere. Now, here's Jonathan.
Welcome back to another episode of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. My guest today is Nathan Turner, and this is a note show. We haven't done a ton of note shows, so this is for you to get ready to learn something new or to advance what you already know about notes. A note simply refers to a promise to pay, and in the case of what Nathan does, it's always backed by residential real estate. This can be in the form of a mortgage, deed of trust, or seller financing. There's a lot more to it. Let's get to it now with Nathan Turner. This is episode 230 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing with my guest, Nathan Turner. Nathan is the owner and president of Earnest Inc., which is also Earnest Investing. He started investing in the U.S. real estate market in 2008 by creating notes and later evolved to buying performing and non-performing notes. This is a tip-off. This is a note show. Now, Nathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Yeah, let's go right into notes and then I'll get to your background. Why notes? Because I know it's something that for the novice investor is pretty confusing. I mean, even to me, being in the game so long, I still don't know that I really get it. So why did you choose notes? And then we'll go to your backstory.
It has a little bit to do with the backstory, but we'll get to that in a little bit.
Yeah.
But the short answer is I get cash flow without owning property, which is fantastic. It's backed by property, but I don't have to actually deal with the property. And so that's that's probably my biggest reason. That's my favorite part.
Cash flow, no tenants, right?
No tenants, no trash, no termites, no taxes even. It's great.
Right. I was thinking cash flow, no tenants, and I'm thinking, oh, well, there's self-storage, but that's still stuff and people involved. So well, tell us why notes just sounded like an easier play. I mean, you kind of explained it, but you can definitely go into the background as well.
Yeah, for sure. And, like so many people that get into notes, I had a real estate background. I was doing fix and flip back in like 05, 06 when everybody else was, and had a great time doing that. As the market started to change, I got stuck with one property. And it was this one property. I was doing it across the country. I live in Canada. I was living in Montreal. The houses were in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. So opposite ends of the country, more or less. And managing that from a distance was just a major headache. Where every time somebody moved out of the house, it was actually cheaper for me to fly out with my suitcase full of tools and, my sleeping bag and sleep on the floor and fix up the property. And that was the best way to do that, the cheapest and best way to do that. And it was just, I couldn't understand why people were doing this. The cash flow was great. That was the part that I really enjoyed. And I'm like, okay, I check every month. I get that. That's cool.
Yeah.
But everything else, all the responsibility towards the house, I was like, I don't get this. I don't know why people do this landlord thing.
Yeah, I mean, even the flipping process or even just the rehab to rent process, I mean, I've been flipping my whole life, but I still, every time I'm doing it, I hate it. When I sell it, I like it because it does well, but there's not a single day where I'm excited during a flip or renovation because something always goes wrong, right? And this is eventually something that you're trying to avoid with notes.
Yeah, exactly. And same thing. I love flipping, actually. I think it's really fun. And I like, getting my hands dirty and all that kind of things, but it's hard work.
Yeah.
There's a lot that goes into it. And especially, at the time as a small operation, it was just me. So I'd go out and I'd maybe have a friend or two come over and help me.
Yeah. The beer and pizza for paint.
Yeah. But it was a lot of work. And when I got into notes, I'm like, okay, so all the cash flow, none of the headaches. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I can get on board with this. Don't get me wrong. There's still work to be done. There are still headaches. There are still problems, but I'm not dealing with the property. And that's, to me, is a bonus.
Yeah, I would guess for notes, it's more financial or logistical problems rather than physical problems. That makes a big difference in terms of the stress level a lot of the time.
Yeah, definitely. It can become a physical challenge where if I end up having to take back a property, now I've got the property again. And those are the times where I'm like, and it just becomes more of a chore.
Yeah.
And, it can turn around and again, don't get me wrong, it usually works out and we do well with it. But it's something I have to deal with. And that's just a pain.
Yeah. That's one of the funniest things, though, because I mean, anytime you're taking a note, or even if we're talking about, seller finance, everyone's like, oh, well, if worst case, you just get the property back. But none of us really want the property back. We want the cash flow.
Exactly.
So when you get the property back, sometimes it's a windfall, but then often that can come with repairs and then, remarketing into the same issue that you had the first time.
Yeah, it's a pain. And it's just something you have to deal with. If I have to go out and actually do something to the property, really? Now I have to line up contractors and now I have to, all those things. Now all of a sudden the property taxes are my issue. Like all those things come into play, and it's more work than I think it needs to be.
Yeah. Well, going back though, when you started just doing rehabs to rent and flipping and things like that, were you full-time in real estate, or did you still have a regular W-2 job at that time?
I've always been an entrepreneur. So this was a side entrepreneur job. I had, it was way back in the day, we had a couple of Curves franchises. So that was kind of my regular all day, everyday thing. And then this real estate opportunity came up. I'm like, yeah, that sounds cool. Let's do it. So it was that didn't help, because then I'm managing the Curves and managing these flips at the same time. And so, it turns into a lot of work. Yeah,
and everybody knows after they go into the side hustle that the side hustle is not a side hustle. It's just a second full-time job.
That's all it is. Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting, though. Well, what led you to real estate, though? Did something come up? Did you read a book, or did somebody point you in the direction to say, hey, this might be pretty nice for your entrepreneurial spirit?
It was a kind of a combination of things. So it was back in the day when house flipping was really popular. So there were all those TV shows online, or not online, but actually on TV back then.
Yeah.
On TLC or whatever, about flip this house and whatever, all those different flipping shows. So my wife and I would watch those, and I was like, oh, it's interesting and it's intriguing. And then we started watching it as not just entertainment, but education. And we're like, okay, so that's how I would do that. And this is what I would do. And so we started kind of picking it apart. And with the entrepreneurial brains, that's where you end up going.
Yeah.
So it was that, and we're like, okay, I could get on board with that. I think that's something we could do. I had painted during university and house repairs and things, so I was fairly handy with a paintbrush and a hammer and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And then it was a conversation with somebody who was trying to sell me on Melaleuca, and it was with the Curves, and she had me meet her there, and she was talking about she was going to get me cleaning products. I'm like, we clean all the time. Sure. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
And right away, when she started talking about Melaleuca, I'm like, you know what? It's just not for me. Lots of people do really well with it, but it's just not something I have any interest in whatsoever.
Yeah.
But during that conversation, she said something about the Saskatoon real estate market being super hot. And I'm like, I've been to Saskatoon. Really? Like that didn't compute. But I had a friend living out there, so I called him after that. And I said, so what's going on out there? And he's like, it's nuts. It's going crazy. Everybody's buying stuff left and right. And I'm like, okay, we can get on board with that. And so that was kind of how we got on board with that.
That's interesting, though, because right now in America, Buffalo was just rated the #1 city to buy rental properties. And it's not like nothing at all against Buffalo. It's great. But like, it's not the place where someone would say, oh, #1 rental market, definitely Buffalo.
Yeah, it was the same thing. Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, in the middle of nowhere. Like, it's nothing but fields of grain and whatever else they're doing out there. And, 200,000 people. Like, it's not a thriving metropolis.
Yeah. Well, what was pushing it? Land, and just willingness for people to move, to get more space, and not a lot of housing, I guess.
Right. Pricing was definitely an attractive option for people. And it's a small city, but it's got, a full university. It's got the biggest push at the time was there was potash mines that were being opened up. And so there's a big push in that, people going out to be part of this potash discovery, whatever, and how they were cultivating it.
Well, I mean, mines in general bring a ton of rental housing. It's just like a lot of construction workers now. People are doing midterm rentals in America in places when the construction's not stopped, because that's just perfect 6-month contracts for people. That's big for mining, oil, things like that, where the workers are going to be there part-time. So when you got down there, what type of properties were you buying to get started? And then, of course, we'll advance all the way up to notes.
Yeah, I'm small, 1,000 square foot, three bedroom, 1 bath kind of thing, maybe 2 bath if we're lucky.
Yeah.
Everywhere's got a basement. So then there's that additional space to deal with, whether you're going to do something with it or not. But, painting this and that, doing flooring, mostly cosmetic stuff. One of my rules for flipping was never open a wall if you don't have to. And so if I don't know about it, I don't have to disclose it. That was kind of my attitude.
Yeah. And I mean, the more walls that you open without knowing, the more pipes you find in electric. And then you're like, why did I do that? Now I have to reconfigure all of this.
Yeah. And of course, there are times when I had to, but as a rule, don't open a wall if you don't have to.
Yeah, but it's good though, because you had at least enough of a skill set to know, hey, you can do this, minor cosmetic part. Yeah. Even when I started, I didn't do anything that was hard. I painted and had someone put in tile and things like that. But honestly, that works if you're buying the right property in the right area.
Yeah, they were mostly just outdated. There were, wartime houses, so like built in the early 40s or something like that. And it was mostly cosmetic. It was nothing terribly difficult. I didn't look for those ones where if we opened it up on here and added addition, that just was not something I wanted to tackle because I knew I was doing most of the repairs myself.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you start doing that, you get through it, you realize, okay, I got these properties in Saskatoon, that's too far away. What led you to Notes? Like, what was the first thing to tell you, like, hey, there might be a bit of an easier way here?
Well, again, it was kind of one of those right place, right time kind of deals where it was the fall of 2008. And a friend of mine, he had moved from Canada down to California, met some investors there. They had purchased a portfolio of properties, about 60 properties, mostly in the Midwest. So like Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, mostly in those 3 states. These guys had bought those properties in like April of 2007, right? Like at the peak of the market. So by fall of 2008, they were supposed to be flipping that package out to another group. That went sideways. Yeah. By the fall of 2008, everything was going all over the place. They knew they'd way overpaid. So they approached us and said, look, we don't know anything about these properties. It was supposed to be just a quick flip. Do what you can. And so they gave us power of attorney, and that was it. No operating budget, no nothing else. Just do what you can. So we kind of thought we'd invented seller financing. We're like, what if we sold these on terms? Wait a second, that's brilliant. And so that was kind of, trial by fire introduction, where we thought we could sell these instead of as rentals, have whoever's moving into that property, they can do the work on the house because we didn't have the operating budget. So they can do the work. They'll make a monthly payment with principal and interest. And then it was, as I was doing research on figuring out how to unload these contracts that we've created, that ran into somebody talking about what I was doing, about buying the kinds of loans that I was creating. And I'm like, oh, there is a market for that. Took a class, went to my first conference that same year in 2009, and just totally opened my eyes that there's a whole market of people that were doing this on a regular basis.
Yeah, there's something interesting about the story because there's this difference between people who have the entrepreneurial spirit and see something and they know, hey, this is time to act. And then the other set of people these days who have shiny object syndrome, and anytime something says it's going to cash flow, Section 8 rentals, I'll do that. Next time, self-storage, I'll do that. You're clearly on the first part. And is it something about the way that you kind of just really always were an entrepreneur that made you know what, I'll try it. If it doesn't work out, I'll just do another entrepreneurial business?
It's really interesting. I've thought about that. I'm not really sure where that comes from. My dad worked the same job his whole career.
Yeah.
Maybe my mom kind of jumped around here and there. She tried different things and always looking for, again, some kind of a side hustle. She was primarily at home with kids. And then outside of that, she was always trying something else. And so she sold vacuum cleaners. She went to work at a sewing store because she could do that. And, little things here and there. So I probably from her, but I'm not really sure.
Yeah, well, it sounds like the seller finance was a real light bulb moment. You're probably disappointed when you read a bunch of books that said, hey, we've been doing this for years and that you didn't invent it. But it is a really simple thing. It's just something that needs to be explained. And a lot of people could probably buy houses that they didn't think they could buy, or sell houses that they didn't think they could sell if they just use, the principles of seller finance, which is, seller, you get your price and I get my terms, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it works really well. And it's funny. I didn't invent it, but I did have the same idea as somebody else who had that. So I feel good about that. I'm at least in good company. But I started talking to different people, reading books and taking some classes from different people that were teaching the business. And just kind of took off from there. So we were still creating, buying houses, selling them on terms, creating these contracts and selling them. That was the beginning part. And then as it kind of progressed, it was like, okay, why are we trying to get the house again?
Yeah, right.
Why are you trying to deal with these properties? Because that's where all the headaches were. And so the more it progressed, the more I've just turned into, you know what, I would way rather just deal with the paper.
Yeah, I sold 2 commercial properties on seller finance, and one was one was about to come back all the way at the end, so it really would have been a good windfall, and I kind of wanted it, and then they paid out literally within 10 days, and I was I was upset about it. The other one, they bought it on seller finance because it was one person in a commercial where we had a vacancy, so we couldn't sell it on the market. We really needed to sell it then because of the vacancy. And then we were cruising along, getting nice payments. And then he's like, "Oh, I'm selling." I'm like, "What?" We just wanted the cash flow, and now we're out and taking the capital gains anyway. So you realize when people said, "Hey, I might be interested in that note," that there may be a better way for you to even get out of, the seller finance portion.
Yeah, we went fairly early on, about 2010. I started buying non-performers, and again, at the time, I was very real estate mindset, and so I was buying the non-performers so that I could get the property. That was the ultimate goal. And then, like I say, as it went on, I'm like, well, why am I doing that? Why don't I just, if I do end up taking that property back, let's seller finance it back out, because I don't want to deal with it. I don't want a rental. I don't want to have to deal with the house. So that was kind of the progression. And when you're buying non-performers, there's so many different directions it can go. So you've got to be loose. You got to be open and just take it how it comes. But as much as we could, anytime we bought something where there's somebody still living there, if you can get them reperforming and get them making payments again, that's ideal. And then I don't have to deal with any of that. Plus, I get to help somebody stay in their home. Like, how great is that?
Yeah, let's focus on that, because so you get the note at a discount, and then there is the ideal scenario is just renegotiating the terms with your new loan so that they can make payments, get back on track, and then now you're the bank, you're just going to have that performing asset for a while.
Yeah, which is fantastic. And so we should say right up front, non-performers are harder to come by these days. Not that they don't exist, but as much as I love them and as much as I can't wait for another crash in the market so I can buy more, they're just not as available. So and like I say, they're fantastic, and I love dealing with them. But that's exactly it. I would buy that. Ideally, there's somebody living there. Ideally, they can start making payments. And you know what? 98% of the time, if we could start a conversation, we'd be able to figure something out and help them be able to stay there. So that's just super rewarding.
Yeah, and that's one of the kind of, I would say, unsung parts of note investing, that you really can help people. I mean, everybody looks at real estate investing as a whole and just thinks, it's a bunch of, people driving Lamborghinis, fleecing tenants and being slumlords. But by buying the note and renegotiating the loan, you keep somebody in their home, and that's what you want too. So there really is a very big win-win inside of that if you can keep it that way.
Yeah, really and truly, I don't want the house. And then when you actually run the numbers, almost always, it's actually more beneficial for them to make those payments anyway. So not only is it a nice thing to have happen, but it's actually the best exit for me in the first place. So I'm very motivated to help them get back on track, stay there. And again, we can work out, there's just a ton of flexibility. So if we can get into a conversation, I can say, okay, so what happened? Where are you at today? What payment is a reasonable payment for you? And then we can back into it and say, well, if $800 was no good, could you do 6? And if you can do 6, then with that, then we'll back into it and say, so then at $600 a month, this interest rate, we stretched it over this time, that works. And then we can have them start making payments again.
Yeah, and I was thinking about the dialogues. When you're having a dialogue, when you're taking over a note, it's much softer and more helpful than when you're trying to, off-market acquisitions for buying homes. The good ones do a great job. They're like, hey, we're here to help you, where are you going? But also those same people are getting spammed by 100, I'll buy your house for cash. So it's a very aggressive process. Like, I want you to get out. Now, this seems like you can really go in as a helper and have a nice conversation. Because what you're saving them, you have to explain it. I'm sure it takes understanding. Maybe they think you're the one coming for them originally, but it can make for some really interesting relationships.
Yeah, it's been really great. And one of the lessons I learned early on, I read a book by Bill Bartman, who's since passed away, but he bought a ton of credit card debt. That was his big business. And the line that he used when he was approaching people that owed money on their credit cards was, look, the only thing we can't do is nothing. For me, that absolutely clicked. And I'm like, oh, that is brilliant. Yeah, we can do all kinds of things. The only thing we can't do is nothing. So choose your own adventure. Let's see what we can do going forward.
Yeah. And like you said, and similar to how we were presenting seller finance, what can you pay for your note? And then let's figure out a way to turn this into, a loan that actually makes sense for both of us. That also gives them some ability of control over the situation, which they've been out of control for so long, which I find with the thing that you don't like to do, but with landlording, when you're going and taking over existing tenants and you give them a say and, hey, here's all the comps, choose your rent. They always choose right up close to the top, a little below. And that's a win-win again.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that's great. And it's the kind of the light bulb moment for me at the very beginning was my very first non-performing note deal, where I bought 3 non-performing notes all in Columbus, Ohio for a ridiculously cheap price. But I went to 2 of the homeowners still lived in Columbus. So these were second properties that they'd purchased with the intention, back in 2005 when you didn't need anything to get a loan. And so they bought the properties when they shouldn't have gotten those loans in the first place, but that's a different story. But they, in both cases, I went over there and me and a friend who's bigger than me, and we knocked on the door and I just said, hey, I own the mortgage. Here's the paperwork to show it. I'm not here to collect any money. I just want the property. And, the one guy was a retired vet and he's like, yeah, where do I sign? And my biggest mistake at that point that I learned going forward is the guy that was with me, he should be a mobile notary. So we can just sign documents right then and there.
Yeah.
And then the other girl, she broke down in tears and she's like, really? You're not kidding? Like, really? You do that? And, it was that one where I was like, wow, I am solving a huge problem for her. And I hadn't considered that before I even knocked on her door. I thought that I was just trying to get the property, but I was solving a huge problem for her. She was losing sleep over this thing. And here I come saying, look, I'll take it all away. And so that just really opened my eyes, like, oh, I can be a huge help here. And that was big.
I mean, it's nice when it's a feel good. I mean, landlording in general is annoying, but you also have this small sliver where like you can really help someone out who needs it. Might be risky though. Maybe you may pay for it later, but you have these opportunities in real estate where you can really, do well by someone. Hey, I hope you're enjoying this episode with Nathan Turner. And one thing that you're going to hear at the end, if you haven't heard it already, is that Nathan runs the Diversified Mortgage Expo. And they're doing it for the 10th time this May. So you have a month to go if you're interested in learning, networking, and growing your knowledge of notes. Go to diversifiedmortgageexpo.com. It's going to be in Nashville in May. So if you want a sweet vacation and to learn about notes, I think you're in business. Let's get back to Nathan. Is the reason why there's not any of these non-performing now is just because so many people have just so much equity for the last few years that they basically can't be in non-performing?
Equity is a big part of it for sure, where the market has just grown tremendously. And, that's another discussion. Is that real or is it something that's going to come crashing down? I don't know. And we'll see as time progresses. I was talking to another friend this morning and she's on the side of we're in for trouble. And so we'll see. But
one person's trouble is another's, present. So
exactly.
That's the way I always think of it.
And then there was, COVID was a very interesting time. So 2019, me and a bunch of other note investors, we would get on these regular calls together and say, okay, so we're due for market corrections. So what's going to happen? What's the trigger? I thought it was going to be debt. I figured that was going to be the thing that bring everything to a head. But it was kind of that direction. And so when COVID hit, we're all like, oh, this is it. This is the trigger we've been waiting for. Here it goes. Another massive wave of defaults. And then they pumped in money and more and more and more. And really, they may have helped solve some problems as people got back on their feet. But I think in a lot of cases, they just kicked the can down the road. So I think we're due for that.
That's a big thing. Kicking the can down the road is kind of part of the process of a lot of things where you end up taking over from something that's happened with that. Yeah. In general, one of the things that I've always had the most questions about, and anytime we have a note show, I'm so curious about, where do you find these things? It's not like you can go on Zillow for notes and just start pulling up all these options because there's very little photographic inventory and things. So you're really buying off potential, right? Or
Yes.
financial documentation of some kind.
Yeah, it's really the documents that matter. Like, what are the numbers, and then what are the documents backing up those numbers? That's a great question, and that's a hard one to answer. So there's, for example, there's paperstack.com with no K on there. That's a pitch for those guys. It's an online platform where people can go to sell their notes, and then you can just go and peruse and, go through whatever listings are up there and see which ones look good to you. If you don't have any training in notes, if you don't know what you're looking for, that can be a dangerous thing, because
that's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
It's a late night session where these all look good. Everything seems so perfect with all these great numbers, but
and that's my first message to people looking at getting into notes: get some education. And I don't teach. That's not a pitch for myself, but get somebody to show you how to do it, because it's not the same as real estate. So you got to make sure you know the rules. So there's Paperstack, and then just tons of networking, lots and lots of networking.
And the interesting thing, I think networking brings you to opportunities where there's bulk notes. It's just that they're not publicly, websites that you can just peruse on your own.
Not really. Paperstack is probably the most popular. There's a couple other ones out there, but they're not really just going to be all over the place. You're going to have to talk to people. You're going to have to get to know them.
Yeah.
That's conferences. I went to my first one in 2009, and then I actually took over a conference a couple of years ago. So I'm a huge believer in conferences. I think getting that face-to-face contact is a big, big deal.
Yeah. And I think the more niche the conference, the better, because you're just not having a multifamily investor pop up at a note conference just for fun. Like everyone really wants to know and really wants to do business, or else you're just not signing up for a note convention. It would just sound too difficult.
Yeah. We'd have some people that come that are curious, which is great, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Maybe they heard about it on a podcast or something like that, and so they want to go check it out. But I would say, more than half of the people there, 2/3 of the people there are at some stage in the business, whether they've just got started or they've got, multi-million-dollar funds.
Yeah. And what better way to get a weekend of information all, like you said, maybe you can't find coaching because, of course, there's not as many training programs for notes out there as multifamily or storage or something like that. There are, our programs, but if you just hit one of these things and you're there 2 days, you see a bunch of speakers, make a bunch of contacts, you're going to be in pretty good shape to at least polish it off with a book or a podcast and just get going. What's the bar to entry for notes? Because when I go through all the asset classes, I'm always thinking about the bar to entry. Like, how much do you need to get into this when you're buying just a very, regular non-performing note?
Yeah, besides the education, that would be the first bar. But once you've got some kind of education, dollars and cents, it actually varies tremendously. Like, you can buy, and this is slightly more advanced strategy, but you could buy like a partial note. I was talking to a guy about a month or so ago, and he had bought a note for, I think it was $10,000. And he kind of was sheepish telling me about it, because he's like, I got a 6% yield. I'm like, you know what? You're in the game. Like, that's what matters. You figured out how to get in there. And so he was like, it's only 6%. I'm like, it doesn't matter. But now you're
better
in the
than zero.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's, it can be as little as 10,000, or it can be hundreds of thousands. So that doesn't help.
Yeah. Well, so
wide open.
Honestly, this is for me just as much because I don't understand. I get the concept and I've played around with it, but I really think I'm helping the listeners by helping myself. Sure. So how are they valuing it? Like, when you're going to buy a note, what are you valuing? You're looking at the documents, say it's a $250,000 home and they have $200,000 left on the loan, but they're, behind some amount. How do you come up with the valuation? Is there a formula, or is it also a kind of a feel for understanding notes?
It is a little bit of both. Heavy on the math, though, because that's what we're buying. So if the balance on that one's $200,000, my next question is, what's the interest rate? Because if it's at a 3% interest rate, I'm looking for at least a 12% yield for my fund. So given that difference, my discount to you as the seller is going to be enormous. So we probably are not going to come to a deal. If your interest rate is, 9%, it was a seller finance deal and you've sold it at 9 or 10%. Now we're talking, we're probably going to be able to come to a reasonable number for both of us, where it's going to be a close enough that we can hash it out.
Interesting.
So that's my very first thing.
Yeah. So, maybe in a year or two, though, with the rates now being so high, those opportunities are there when people start to get a little bit less on the appreciation windfall that they've been receiving.
Yeah, certainly. If there's another kind of a, call it a correction, call it a crash, whatever you want. But as we see that come into effect, yes, definitely those 6-7% loans are going to be far more attractive for somebody like me than the 3 or 4% loans that were created a couple of years ago.
Yeah. And are you buying what I would call alternative notes, which is more seller finance and other things like that? Is that easier than buying just non-performing, mortgage notes? Those are usually going to be swept up into the bank process, right?
Typically right now. And again, barring some kind of shift in the economy, we'll see.
Yeah.
And I think that we're going to see some more of those coming available, but I think I've been saying that for more than a year now. So we'll see. But yeah, I'm buying a lot more of the seller finance stuff. I'm primarily looking for performing loans where people are making regular payments. Those seller finance deals tend to be higher interest rates, 8, 9, 10%, somewhere in there.
Okay. So your bread and butter now is just buying notes that other people want to offload so you can take over just a very good paying client at the time.
Yeah. And it's interesting. It really feels like coming full circle for me because that's what I started out doing, was creating these notes. And so that's been fun. And then the paperwork, all those kinds of things go into it. So how is this created? Did you use a residential mortgage loan originator? Are you following the CFPB rules or not? And none of those things are necessarily deal breakers, but it will for sure affect the price.
Yeah. Okay.
If it's something I have to fix, then I won't pay it.
So tell us about Earnest Investing, but also tell us about the conference, because I think that is a real quick way for people to learn more. Hey, go to a conference like we were saying, get all the information at once, decide if it's for you. If not, bookmark it for later.
Yeah. Yeah. The conference, we took it over in 2023, my wife and I, and it's in Nashville, Tennessee. A, because that's really fun. And B, because it's...
that helps. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's fairly central. One of my goals, having gone to a lot of conferences when I was living in Montreal, sometimes you go to those ones in Vegas or somewhere on the West Coast and a 3-hour time difference is brutal. So 2 hours max. But it's all about note investing. Anything from, what's the state of the market today with notes and mortgages, all the way to, we've got one of our last sessions coming up on this one is, we're calling out wild workouts. So just like war stories, people that have gone through and figured out different ways to work with people on making payments again. So that'll be a lot of fun. It's all education and networking. Nobody's allowed to sell you anything from stage. It's just come and learn and network with other people. And
that's helpful too, because, the big conferences, of course, they're going to have a whole, room of stuff, but it's always in the room. So, if you step inside the room, you're getting sold. Step outside, you're pretty good. So this is called the Diversified Mortgage Expo, right?
Yes. Coming up May 2nd and 3rd in Nashville. And, I'm biased, but I highly recommend it. That's really how I got my start. That's how I've grown my business, is by going to conferences. So I know it sounds like a pitch, but it's the truth. That's how I've grown my business, is just going to conferences.
Sounds good. So tell us about Earnest Investing. How did you come up with that? Is that a business for yourself, or also are you building that out for others to invest with you as well?
Yeah, Earnest Investing is the fund that we created. So Earnest Inc. is kind of the core company, and then Earnest Investing is the name of the fund. It's a 506c, so that means it's for accredited investors. Yep. And people can invest into that. And performing notes is fairly passive. Performing note fund is completely passive.
Yeah.
You're just, you don't have to do anything. You put the money in, and that's your sleep at night money. And could you get higher returns with a flip or a syndication? Probably, but it's far more speculative.
Right.
Where this is what's going to happen. And as much as I can't say guarantee, we pay 8%. That's what we do.
Right. Right. So note funds, it's just fixed return. They know, generally you're investing in a big box of notes that you have, but they're going to get their fixed return, no matter what, barring something, crazy, which I don't foresee happening, especially in this asset class is rock solid still.
Yeah. When we were putting it together, we were like, how could this break? How could this go completely off the rails? And as much as we tried to poke holes and talking with friends and family and everything, like how could this fall apart? It would have to be something majorly catastrophic for something to go majorly wrong. So it's an interesting asset class that way.
Yeah, and by creating a fund of so many different notes, that gives you leverage against, same as you own 100 units of a multifamily and one
Right.
person moves out, it's not really that big a deal. So
Right.
if something goes haywire with one mortgage and you have a fund with 90 notes in there, you're hedging against yourself with all of the other ones.
Yeah, exactly. It's an immediate diversification because we're split up between all these different notes instead of like one apartment building or whatever it might be, one strip mall, whatever it might be. This is much more diverse.
Yeah. So other than Diversified Mortgage Expo, which is coming up in May, of course, where should somebody get started if they're like, this actually sounds pretty good to me. I'm tired of my rental properties. I'd like to, leverage something that's a little bit more passive. Just in general, if someone wants to invest in notes, where would they even start?
There's a number of good Facebook groups out there. I would suggest one of those. Me and a colleague, his business is called JKP Holdings. We do a podcast every other week. We've been doing it 3 years now, 3.5 years. And so we've got a bunch of shows on there, and same kind of thing. We bring on people that help teach us something we didn't know before.
Yeah.
And it makes us look smart for some reason. But yeah, it's mostly stuff we don't know. And so we bring on somebody to tell us something that they can help us to expand our own business. Now, the show is called the Real Estate Notes Show, and that's on whatever podcast place you want to go, or YouTube or Facebook.
Awesome. And I mean, it seems like it's just something, if you want to do it yourself, it's still a decent amount of work. I mean, we have to get that out there. You need to understand the financing and be able to look at the loans, but over time it gets easier because you really create a buy box for a note that's pretty easy to see, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then the more you're in the business, the more you're talking to people, you start finding those notes easier and easier. People start coming to you and say, hey, I've got this note for sale. Are you interested? Nice.
Because that's similar to overage again. The reason I've made so many comparisons for the show is just because I don't think so many people are as familiar with note investing.
Right.
But single family home buyers, they end up, if they're good marketers, they end up with overage, and then they end up either wholesaling, but they usually just sell the properties to their friends because they have it. And this in the note business happens a lot. Somebody buys a portfolio, they want to kick off some of them. And it's a very small group of people who are just like, hey, do you need these? This fits your buy box, and you could trade them some later along the same lines.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll get together at a conference and say, hey, I'm looking to buy something. Oh, hey, so-and-so's got some notes he's looking to sell. Go talk to him. Oh, yeah, good.
Yeah. I can see somebody coming with, just like a little dossier of notes like, hey, this is what I got. I mean, that seems like because like you said, there's not too much missing from the equation. It's finances, of course, maybe do a little due diligence on the overall value of the property to confirm, but really it's based on the note, the payments, and like you said, the debt and the tenancy, where they're at, how far behind.
Yeah. And then, we're looking at title as well, making sure there's no other liens that are going to threaten us.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So there's work for sure. Is it hands off? Almost. There's still work to be done, but, and can you screw it up? Yeah, you can. So again, get some education, make sure you know what you're doing before you get into it.
Yeah. And for the note investors out there who are thinking it might work for them, you don't have to go to Columbus, Ohio and knock on the doors. Right. Most note investors aren't leaving their office, right?
No. Now I do everything. I live in Canada. So can you do it from a distance? Yeah, absolutely. It's what I do every day.
Yeah. And do you have any preferred note markets, or is it really just notes that come up that make sense to your buy? Like, do you really care where you buy? Does that matter in note investing?
For the most part, I don't really care. Where I might care is those states where if I do end up having to foreclose, how easily can I get that done? So all of New England is kind of X.
Yeah.
That's the hard part of the country where it's just their laws are just weird and they take a long time, and
that defeats the purpose. If you have to do it, if it's going to take a long time, then it's like a double annoyance at that point.
Right. Yeah. But Texas is great for me, mostly because of my price point. I look for notes with values under 250,000. So because of that, most of mine tend to be on the eastern half of the country. Yeah. But Michigan to Texas, everything else in between, that's mostly. I've had notes in Arizona and Colorado and Nevada, but those are much fewer and far between.
Yeah, but that's a really good price point too, comparing to the things that we've talked about, because your exposure on each note really is not that big when you compare it to the overall, like we were saying with, having a fund.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of that diversification in the fund is I've got, hundreds of these things. that I can choose from. And then I choose the ones that I like that for, my reasons that I've developed over time, and then we'll plug those in. And so it becomes part of, 100 notes or 150 notes that are in the portfolio.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'm really glad I had you on, because each time I've had a note show, I've gotten like a little more information for myself, but I feel like hopefully the listeners are like, wow, okay, it's starting to really make sense, because I don't know. I think to the outward world, it just seems like it would be super complicated, maybe on the way in, but once you get going, it's just like a lot of other assets.
Yeah. So the guy that I do the podcast with, he does work a regular 9 to 5, and then this is a side gig. So I can't imagine doing that. I know how busy I am, and so I can't imagine doing that. But he's making it work, so it can be done.
Awesome. Is the best place for people to get in touch with you, find out more about what you do, at earnestinvesting.com?
That would be the best place. Then there's some short little videos on some more information. There's more read up stuff there. There's links to the conference if that's what you're interested in. But yeah, that's probably the best place to go.
Yeah, we'll link to that. And then the conference is at diversifiedmortgageexpo.com.
Yeah.
Awesome,
Can't
Nathan.
wait. We're really looking forward to that one this year. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, remember, it's May 2nd, so you still have time to try to get in there if you can. Yeah. In Nashville, too, so you can have some fun. Well, I really appreciate it. I'm glad you opened my eyes more to notes, and thanks for spending the time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, that was Nathan Turner. He is the owner and president of Earnest Inc. I'm Jonathan Green. We'll see you next episode. Thanks for sticking around so you can find out who's coming up on the next episode of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. And episode 231 is with Randy Smith of Impact Equity. What do they do? Impact Equity offers investors carefully vetted investment opportunities that span a diverse range of deals, operators, business plans, asset classes, and geographic locations. We're talking passive investing. See you next episode with Randy.